Hi, this is Peter Sage, and stay tuned to Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, where I'm going to be sharing with you really what it takes to live the most authentic level of leadership in one of the toughest environments you could ever imagine. We're going to be peeling back the layers of the onion on psychology and really delving to a place of that you really do need to go to understand how to give the best of who you are to the world at large.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series, where today we're going to be looking at having the courage to test your leadership style and your theories in the most extreme circumstances. Will they stand up to it? If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. If you're a regular, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And with over 2 million downloads, we're very excited about that. And we're honored to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. So thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Listen, there are over 1 million podcasts out there. Quite literally, thousands of them are focused on either business or leadership. But there's only one show that is focused on what's at the heart and soul of business and leadership, and you're tuned into it right here with me, Dov Baron. So remember, we always need your help in staying relevant. Get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, you're someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, an entrepreneur, a leader in any capacity, you know that you can no longer lead, or for that matter even live, on theory. We now live in a glass world where everybody is looking in and is very quick to see whether you are living what it is that you say you believe, whether you're true to your actions or not. However, the ultimate test is where you will go in extreme environments. Well, stay tuned because you're about to find out the real test. My guest today is an international best-selling author and renowned public speaker who at 18 years old wrote his first book and published it on health and fitness called Supreme Physique. Peter Sage is named as one of the greatest leaders and entrepreneurs of 2015 by Inspiring Leadership Now. That was alongside Richard Branson, Elon Musk, and Mark Zuckerberg, guys you may have heard of. Peter Sage is a well-known international entrepreneur with over 35 years experience, and who would believe it looking at him, because he only looks 37. 35 years experience of growing fast-paced enterprises. During this time, he's launched and operated and brought to success over 24 companies, several of which he took from scratch to 8 figures. A long-standing member of the global EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. For several years, Peter served as a member of the advisory board for the Center for Entrepreneurship at INSEAD, a global top 5 business school and one of the world's leaders in the field of entrepreneurial education. Peter is also an advisor to the Hungarian government on their creative thinking tank policies. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome my friend, Peter Sage!
Well, what an introduction, Dov. Thank you, and how great to be actually here together. We've bounced around the world a few times, and it's great to sort of settle back down here on your podcast. It's doing so well, and I'm so happy for you.
Thanks, mate. I really appreciate that. Well, just to give everybody a bit of background, I think we met like 12 years ago, was it?
Somewhere around there.
About 12 years ago, and I think somebody conned you into coming to one of my seminars. And you came and took one of my trainings, and you were there, and then I found out later that you've been there, and we hung out and connected. And really, I mean, for me, it was instant friendship. We got really connected real fast. And you had already been doing amazing things. By then, you'd already been speaking, and you were also speaking alongside Tony Robbins at that time, and you were part of Tony's trainings. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And then you were still running your businesses, still doing the entrepreneur stuff, but you were also doing the personal development stuff. Just sort of give us a quick view of going into that world.
Well, it's fascinating because the two passions that I'd had ran side by side from the age of 17. Mm-hmm. I'd always seen myself as a born entrepreneur. I'd never fitted into the school system, which essentially teaches you how to pass tests and work for somebody else. And really, I'd always wanted that little spark. But there's nowhere in the school system, or at least back then, that really focused on the character traits required to develop yourself as an entrepreneur.
Right.
And that's really a test of fire, as you know, for almost anybody. Sure. Being out there in the world without any kind of certainty of what money you're going to earn next week. So personal development came along at the same time. I was introduced to it through somebody and very quickly stumbled across Think and Grow Rich. And from there, I thought, wow, you mean there's an industry that teaches success?
Right.
And I started devouring it. My friends would be down the bar after work. I'd be earning what I could by selling, buying and selling, and then buying what I could with the money I made to listen to another tape in my bedroom in my headphones. And so personal development became a passion that ran alongside. Right. But I saw the corollary quite quickly that if I applied what I was learning, you talk earlier about theory, doesn't cover it. If I applied what I was learning, and why wouldn't you, I started doing better in business.
Right.
So the two have tracked for the last, say 3 decades now. And I've been very blessed and honored to have, been around some of the greatest names in the industry for many, many years, people like Tony, for example. And it's a part of who I am now. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it kind of made sense to go into the business side of personal development and combine the two.
Yeah, and then, so you did that, you were in business, you've run your own events, you run your own programs as a separate business as well as your other businesses. One of your businesses was to do with space. Tell us a little bit about that, because I want people to get a sort of context of this vast depth of experience that you've got.
Well, space energy was an incredible concept of commercializing space-based solar power. And just to give you the easy overview on that, instead of taking solar panels and putting them on the rooftops or in fields where every night it gets dark, if you were to put them in space where the sun never sets and then broadcast that energy on demand back to Earth through radio wave, you would have a game-changing technology that would essentially transition mankind into the holy grail of renewable energy, which is baseload, on-demand renewable energy. Now, the only thing that can provide that really is hydro, but it's all tapped out. Right. Geotherm to an extent, but it's location dependent. But sunlight is the most pure form of energy. Everything else, you look at gas, coal, is basically reprocessed sunlight.
Yeah.
And so it was an ambitious project. We were working alongside NASA, Boeing, some of the big names, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, all of the big players. And I decided to set up a business that would commercialize this technology. The slight challenges were that you needed about $300 million for a non-commercial demonstrator and about $10 billion for the first working satellite.
Is that all?
And as you would, spare change for some, but it's
cash in your embassy coupons, getting your green shield stamps. You can cover $10 billion, no problem.
Wow. It was a fascinating project, and I learned a lot because I invested every penny that I'd ever made into that project. So I believed in it, and that's part of my downside. Sometimes is also my upside. I believe so much, and we had investors come in, and unfortunately we were too far ahead of our time. It was such a big ask that commercially I couldn't make it work. The business model was unsustainable, and unfortunately we actually were taken down by a bad debt, unfortunately. But everyone said we were too far ahead of our time. And what's interesting is that now just taken over from Bill Gates temporarily as the richest man in the world, a gentleman called Jeff Bezos.
Yep,
I'm Bezos, sure Amazon. Many people on this podcast are familiar with, is now on record as wanting to develop space-based solar as the next generation of energy to save the planet and save humanity. And I'm like, well, come on, Jeff, catch up. But he did it right first. He went and built a very profitable and sustainable business that allowed him to be able to venture into those markets. People like Elon Musk as well, for example. So, the technology and the idea was obviously fully validated. We just didn't have the commercial acumen to make it a reality. And therefore, unfortunately, that was a costly exercise.
So this was your biggest. I mean, like I said, I said in the intro, you've taken several businesses into the 8 figures. You've grown all these amazing amount of companies and done all kinds of things. But this was your biggest thing, right? This was the big baby.
Certainly the most ambitious. And we came within days of closing a deal for a large ground-based solar park that we'd actually done a deal with the Native American Indians, the Navajo, whereby we'd taken a deal with them where we'd got the land, we'd got the financing in place for a 300 megawatt park. It was going to provide jobs, clean energy, and income for them. It was a real win-win. And we're literally days from closing. It's about a $350 million deal. And the euro crisis hits. And our merchant bankers were a company called Natixis, who, although we're working out of the Wall Street office, were based in Paris as their head office. And when the euro crisis hit, they reevaluated. And this just shows anything can happen in business at the last minute, and nothing's in the bank till it's in the bank. And they wanted to actually have the Navajo put up a casino as collateral, which wasn't part of the deal. And by the time we got the deal repapered, the Department of Energy that was doing some of the grants at that time, those had expired, and it was no longer as viable as we needed it. So,
amazing.
Yeah, that was had that gone through, it would have been a different story. But yeah, it's part of the fun adventure of life, I'm afraid.
So this is interesting, and I want to just have everybody. So now everybody's got a grasp of some of the background of where you've come from and some of the things that you've done, which of course we've merely scooted over because there's so much. I remember years ago, there was a show on TV. I think it might even still be running. It was called Survivor. And I never had any particular interest in it, but I did see the very first episode. And I remember watching the show. I didn't even think I watched the whole thing. I watched parts of it. And I remember turning to my wife, Renuka, who you know, and said to her, "This show is going to be massive." And she's like, "Why?" It was one of the very early reality TV shows. And I said, because whatever you think you are changes when you're in a survival environment. When everything that you are familiar with, that is comfortable to you, is taken away. We're all great philosophers. We're all great, insightful, enlightened beings, as long as we've got enough comforters around us. But when you're placed in a situation where it feels desperate and down to that survival line, that's the test. That's the place. And I believe I put up one of your quotes yesterday, I think it was, which is, you remember the quote when I said about your theory isn't the price of admission into the higher level of consciousness. Is that correct?
Correct. Theory doesn't cover the price of admission to the higher levels of consciousness.
Right. So there's a point where your theory goes out of the window when you're tested. And before I started talking about this, you were selling us about space energy and this massive project, multiple billions, big deals, Navajo. I know you were negotiating with the governor at the time, and all those kinds of big things were going on. It was a big world. You'd been living in Dubai on the Palms, driving your McLaren. It all looked pretty amazing, but it actually became the thing that would essentially bring you down. Sort of give us a little bit of background about what happened.
Well, when we started running out of money, I was approached by a gentleman that essentially offered an extra profit source, which was purchasing IT equipment and reselling it. And I wasn't bound by any terms and conditions on that, but we represented the fact that we weren't going to be reselling it. And as a result of that, I was actually sued for a substantial amount of money by a large player that didn't take too kindly to the fact. And as a result of that, I found myself and my ego landed me in contempt of court several years later. And I had some amazing lessons to learn from that. But it did actually place me in a place I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd ever end up. And that was as the only civil prisoner in Britain's toughest prison. And that was
so let's just stop that for a minute, because I want everybody to get that. Because this is like, you and I were talking about this, as I said, you and I, for everybody who was watching, listening, you and I have been friends for a long time, even though we haven't lived in the same country for 10 years. We've stayed in contact. We've followed through with each other. And then suddenly I get this message that you might be going to be at Her Majesty's service, that you might be going to jail. I'm like, and I'm talking to Ren, talking to my wife, and she's like, what? That's not right. There's something off for you. But you were the only civil prisoner in Britain's hardest prison in the country. Like, help us understand this, because I'm baffled. I can't imagine how baffled you were.
Yeah, and you can come many different ways on philosophy, and I'm sure we'll explore that as well. But so why things happen for the reasons they do. But from a technical perspective, yes, I was in contempt, and the judge sentenced me initially to 18, reduced to 12, served 6 as a civil prisoner, which essentially, for those listening, means I've never been accused of a crime, never been convicted of anything, and I still don't even get a criminal record after leaving prison. It's one of the very weird sort of twists in the British justice system that allow for that to happen. And it baffled everybody. I mean, I was, more so the prison officers, to be fair, because nobody knew how to deal with me.
Because you're in prison, and this is what I want everybody to get, because we're going to come to an important point about this in a minute. You're in prison, but you have no criminal record, and you are not a criminal. Right? Even now, after release, you have no criminal record. You can travel, you can fly, you can do all the things that a normal criminal couldn't do. Yet you served 6 months in a hard prison, and you said even the governor was like, "I don't know what we're supposed to do with you." Is that right?
Correct. Well, for the first, I should have, as a civil prisoner, I should have been shipped to a what's called an open prison, which is where the lowest risk people are. And that should have happened pretty much straight away, but it didn't. There's a lot of flaws and dysfunction in the system, which is essentially archaic. It's not what it's designed for. And again, we have many conversations around that. I mean, education is the same thing. Education system in the Western world was designed for a post-industrial revolution transition to get people out of fields and working in rows and factories and doing as they're told and conforming and complying so they don't hurt themselves with this new technology. And they followed orders, didn't have any creativity or inspiration. And we're living with the aftermath of that. And the modern education system is fantastic at doing what it was designed for, which just happens to be 150 years out of sync with where we are right now.
Absolutely.
The prison system in the UK was designed as a punishment and containment system for criminals.
Right.
And it is, they talk about rehabilitation. It doesn't happen. 70% of all prisoners on release recede within 12 months. There is no... there is nothing in there that facilitates anything other than teaching you how to be a better criminal.
Right.
And so, I went into that environment, and it was a fascinating, certainly an adventure. I'll give you that. I mean, again, I have several angles on how I looked at that. And in terms of dealing with adversity, in terms of the lessons, obviously, I clearly needed to learn at some level, looking at the role that my ego played in me getting in there, and, what I needed to learn in letting go of that, looking at, why I was sent there at a higher level to be able to help people or see a system or work with people that I'd never get the chance to work with before, seeing if what I taught really worked in an environment like that. I mean, there were so many different angles.
Absolutely.
But I didn't plan for it. Certainly wasn't expecting it. And just like life, just like business, things come out of left field, and we either step up or we drown.
One of the things about it, you just mentioned it, and I want to bring it up because, again, you were not in there as a criminal. You didn't commit a crime. You were there because of contempt of court, which suggests, for those of us who are familiar with the term, that there was some ego involved. Walk us through what it was that got you contempt.
Well, I mean, I don't want to go probably into too many details because it falls into a little bit of a he said, she said, which is essentially what court is. Yeah. And I wrote, as I think I shared a copy with you. Yes. I journaled while I was in there. Every 2 weeks, I wrote a private journal to my coaching groups that were following me every step of the way. And a lot of that revealed the lessons, the adventures, the violence, the reality of what was happening, and what I was doing to cope, survive, even thrive in that environment. And there was a huge amount of lessons that unfolded. But one of the things was it gave me a real insight into the criminal justice system and how it's set up. And it really is about who can win the argument. It's got nothing to do with fairness.
No.
It's not based on fairness. It was initially designed to be set up on fairness. But the way the politics of it work undermine that, because everybody goes into court with one agenda. How do we win? Nobody walks into court with an agenda of how do we lose.
No.
So no matter how thin you slice it, there's always two sides. And so everybody's game becomes, how do we distort context? Mm-hmm. How do we manipulate or partialize content? And how do we create the courtroom theater to tell the story in the way that's most convincing? That's essentially what it is. It's a debating platform for professional debaters to win arguments on points and counterpoints. And that's really...
Except the chips are people.
100%. Yeah.
Right.
And I think it was issue number... I wrote 11 issues while I was in there. I think on issue number 9, I really go into the understanding, because by that time I'd seen it, I'd been exposed to it, and delved and delineated all of the different aspects. And that's really what I was doing in the journal. I was showing people not the surface that the public are used to seeing, but peeling back the layers of the onion, not just on the system, but on the psychology of the people. Whether they were prisoners, whether they were murderers, whether they were about to commit suicide, which 3 deaths in 1 week was the worst week I was there, by the way. Whether they were serial violent people, whether they've been caught up inadvertently in the system and shouldn't be there. There was a lot of that. Whether they should definitely be there, and there was definitely some of that. And everything in between. So it was really about breaking it down as a mirror to ourselves on what we could learn, reflected in the harshest environment I'd ever been in.
Mm-hmm. And you said you wrote these pieces. Of course, I got to read some of it, called The Inside Track, which was very much a look inside of that world that most people would not expect. I mean, I think that we are educated about the prison system from one of two places, which is the news, which is a manipulated environment, and or movies, which is another manipulated environment. But there's not much truth that is shown. I mean, I've seen some of it through Vice and other channels where you get to see sort of what is going on in the inside track. But that's very different than the inside track of being inside, not for the weekend, but for, because, we're going to do a documentary and I'm going to go inside for a weekend. Yeah, well, there's a film crew following you around. It's kind of a little bit artificial. But, you talked about in your inside track documents about feeling like a secret agent. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, one thing I know is that the river of life never flows in a straight line. There are always bends in the river. Mm-hmm. And challenges and adversity come from essentially 3 different places. I won't dive into it too much here in terms of the first one, because it's a little bit more metaphysical, energetic, but still very true. And that's how it relates to essentially the amount of importance we place on things, which is a whole aspect or a concept introduced by Vadim Zeland in his groundbreaking book, Transurfing. But one of the biggest areas of adversity and challenge that we face are what I call graduation events. They are tests of growth to see if we can become the people that we either want to be, should be, or have convinced ourselves we already are. And it's just like school. Everything is a fractal, and we're in Earth school. But if we consider the fact that we go to school, let's say we're in year 10, and the questions are harder than when we were in year 9. Well, they're designed to be.
Yep.
And at the end of year 10, guess what? You take an exam. Mm-hmm. And if you graduate that event, then you go to year 11, where guess what? The questions are harder.
Right.
And if you don't and you fail that exam, you go resit year 10 and until you learn the lesson. Right. And there was a lot of people in prison that had been there 3rd, 4th time, kept failing the exam and kept having to resit it. And so for me, when I went in, I understood that whatever it is that I'm facing is always an area of growth, so that I can become more of who I should be in order to contribute and add more value. And that's evident by looking at nature. nature operates on two laws: the law of growth and contribution. Everything in nature grows and contributes, or it's taken out of the food chain.
Right.
And the membrane between the two is cooperation.
Yeah.
So when I went in, you first things first, you can never ever change anything that's already happened as a prerequisite. You can only deal with what's in front of you.
Right.
So when I was in the van on the way, actually when I was walking down the steps at court into the cells, I made a decision there and then that I got one or two ways that I could look at this. One is I'm a victim, and a lot of people play that game excessively, and that's not a way to pass a graduation event. That's a way to resit an exam over and over, because nowhere in the universe is the role of victim rewarded, other than if you're the ego.
Right.
So ego loves the emotional juice of victim because it gets away with trading off the fact that there's no responsibility involved, and therefore it's not my fault.
Exactly.
It engineers you into a comfort zone that'll literally kill you.
Right.
And that's not metaphorical. The biggest killer of elderly people is one word: retirement. You look at the figures, and most people within 18 months to 2 years of retiring are taken out of the game. And why?
Absolutely.
Because they're no longer contributing.
Right.
Nature sets it up that way.
Yeah.
So, from my side, I didn't want to. I couldn't change what happened, but if I saw it as a graduation event or as a challenge, then what is my role? Well, I've spent the last 30 years developing myself, in the last 10 with a mission to help raise the consciousness of humanity in ways that can empower people to become better versions of themselves, to hold up a mirror for their own greatness, not through me saying I'm great, I'm just as flawed and screwed up as the next guy,
sure.
But from a place of possibility. Again, from being able to hold up a mirror to people to see their own potential through the eyes of having the courage to accept that they were born a miracle, not a screw up. So through that, I thought I wanted to become a secret agent of positive change. I thought, what an opportunity. I would never get the chance to go to an environment like prison and work with some of the people who probably most need the message that I bring, but are in such a place that they'd never get the opportunity to avail it.
Right.
So that's what I went in with. And I started right from walking down the steps and cheering up the guards at the court to, being able to start transforming lives in the waiting room, waiting for see which cell I was going to be put in at the prison. And it never stopped. And it was part of that is really what kept me going.
Well, the worst thing you can be in jail is a copper. The worst thing you could be is a member of the police force who got sentenced, and you look like a copper. Like how tall are you, Pete? 6 what?
6'3".
6'3". This blue-eyed. You look like a bobby, right? It looks like a copper, and there you are in the nick. And somebody actually asked you if you were a copper, didn't they?
Several people. In fact, I walked in, and the actual desk officer that was signing me in asked me, says, "Are you a policeman?" And I'm like, that is not the label I want to be coming here with. And no, actually, I'm not. And then it was funny because when I was waiting for my medical and I actually finally went in, it was about 11 o'clock at night on a Friday night. And I'd been in the holding room with about a dozen other people that were in that day. Some had transferred from other prisons. Some were there for the first time, deer in the headlights. And I got called in to see the doctor. And I'm having a good old chat with the doctor. And he stops me mid-flight. He says, "Excuse me, can I ask you a question?" He says, "Yeah. Are you sure this is your first ever time in prison?" I've gone, "Yes." Why? He says, "Are you undercover?" I'm like, "No." Why? He says, "You're far too happy to be in prison for your first time." And I explained a little bit about what I thought my role was. I'm here to become an agent of change. I'm here to help work with people that would never have the chance otherwise to understand, or help at least understand people at this level so that I get a deeper insight into working with levels of society that I hadn't had the opportunity to work with at that level before. Luckily he didn't prescribe me crazy pills, which was a good sign.
Could have easily happened, my friend. Let's just get this boy a self-hugging jacket.
Well, you laugh at that. The government report just came out on Pentonville, which was the jail that I was in.
I saw that report. That was insane.
Yeah, and it was 1 in 5 of the inmates. There's 1,300 inmates. It's for 1,100. It's 200 overpopulated, and 1 in 5 are on antipsychotic medication. Yeah, more than that are on antidepressants.
Right.
And a vast majority are openly on drugs. We're talking illegal drugs.
Sure.
Yeah, and anything you want there, you can order almost at will, whether it's heroin, crack, spice, mamba, or all of the stuff, marijuana. It's available so openly that it's just, it was eye-opening. I mean, per capita, way higher than the outside.
Sure.
And it was an environment. Again, I was shocked at the level. I mean, the violence. We go into it if you wish, but it was just such an incredibly tough environment. I was there for 4.5 months instead of 4.5 days that I probably should have been before being shipped out to an open prison, and that was just down to the dysfunction of the system.
So
and
let's just go there for a minute, because that's fascinating. Because I will openly say that one of my great fears is to go to prison. For whatever the reason, because you were there and you're not even a criminal, right? But we've all seen the movies, we've saw the shows, we've read the books, even the violence, the drugs, the bullying, the gangs, the rape of males. Did you not have any of that apprehension before you were sentenced, or after you were sentenced, or even as you were in that holding cell trying to? I mean, I get being positive, but that we've all lived in we've marinated in that juice of this is what prison is.
Yeah. Again, I've done some pretty tough things to toughen me up over the years. From running the toughest foot race in the Sahara to God knows what. I jump out of airplanes for fun. So the amount of uncertainty wasn't an issue. No. Self-preservation, I never for one second worried. And part of that was the default psychology. I'm an inverse paranoid. I believe the universe is involved in a giant hidden conspiracy to make me happy and successful. And part of that was the fact that I never saw myself identity-wise as a prisoner. No. Not for a second. Right. I was there as a secret agent of positive change. Yes, I'd done something wrong. Yes, I got my wrist slapped. Yes, I was put into this environment. But I also know that fear is your worst enemy in that environment.
Sure.
Anyone been bitten by a dog will know that.
Mm-hmm.
But fear, people used to say to me, because in issue 3 of the Inside Track, I really go into in details. I don't pull any punches, because people like saying, it sounds like you're having a holiday camp. I'm like, well, let me tell you what it's really like.
Sure.
Yeah, with the violence and the drugs and the quality of the food and the 23.5-hour day bang up, and the drugs and the cockroaches and the rats and the mice, and it wasn't pleasant. But I know that fear is your enemy at that point. Now, I'm not talking bravado as a insulator. Bravado is just it will get you stabbed with a pointed toothbrush just as quickly.
Sure.
So fear, when it comes to people say fear, so you don't go on holiday to a war zone, or you don't go and walk close to a cliff edge. Well, no, I'm sorry, but intelligence is your best friend in that, not fear.
Right.
So fear will shut down the prefrontal cortex very quickly.
Absolutely.
It literally squeezes blood out of the front part of the brain into the limbic part of the brain, so that you can act off reflex.
Yep.
Because in fight or flight, that's what happens. So in other words, if your stress levels, or fear, same thing, go up, your intelligence plummets.
Yep. By 27%. The 27% of your blood flow to the frontal lobe of your brain is cut off. You're 27% dumber in high stress situations.
At least. We've all said and done things that we really shouldn't have said or done when we were stressed out. No. Yeah. And slept on our own or on the couch, And so, for me, I knew that intelligence was my friend in there. Right. And luckily, one thing I was grateful for, I had a set of skills that allowed me to interpret human behavior and situations probably more so than the average person that hadn't gone through some of the training I was fortunate to have had. So, when I'm seeing a group dynamic, I'm assessing lightning speed. Those dynamics, whether it's who's in charge, what the pupil dilation is to the breathing patterns, to the micro movements of the face, to the language patterns, to everything. and I'm making assessments consciously and unconsciously very quickly based upon my training and my history to read that situation to either diffuse it, which I did several occasions, or to avoid it, or to be able to at least manage my way through that with some level of safety.
So were you under threat at any time in that? I mean, like we see in the movies, were you directly physically threatened?
At one point, yes, I had a cellmate that was psychotic for 10 days. I was able to work with him and really calm him down at least 3 out of 5 times. He was a big guy as well, again, taller than me, about 220 pounds. And his body was kind of built on late night beer and kebabs. It wasn't exactly a fit guy, but he would lie on the bottom bunk and he'd be quiet for 2 hours and then start an argument with himself. Why am I here? What's this got to do? And then start kicking off and then start throwing the furniture at the door. And then and at one point, yes, I was trying to help him, and he picked the TV up, threatened to smash it in my face. And that was the time I thought I've probably done what I could in here, and I put in an application to move cells after that. Let's say so. Yeah, there were certain times where I'm thinking, okay, this could go a little dodgy here.
Right.
But again, my default position was always trying to help.
Sure.
It was always trying to add value, and I think a lot of that kept me safe as well.
Yeah. So one of the stories that you talked about was in the inside track was about a guy who was a Nigerian guy. I believe he ended up as a cellmate with you. Tell us a little bit about that story, because I think it's a fascinating look at not only the misdirection of, quote, justice, but also in how quickly we judge based on color, nationality, and even societal conditioning about a certain person in a certain environment, and what happened as a result of that. Walk us through a little bit of that, Peter, because that was fascinating for me.
Thank you. Well, yeah, gentleman's name was Patrick, and amazing guy. We, again, serendipitously kind of met, and I'll share an analogy, if you like, which I think is useful for people, because a lot of people talk about the difference between coincidence or synchronicity. Coincidence usually is a lot of the materialist-based viewpoint of the world, where random things happen. It has its basis in randomness. That's coincidence for people. Mm-hmm. Other people at the slightly higher level of consciousness are starting to really understand more that there really are no coincidences. And the term that was coined by the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, who obviously I'm a big fan of, I think you are as well, was synchronicity. Mm-hmm. And so people say, is there a difference between synchronicity and coincidence? And yes, absolutely. So I want to give people an analogy which may be useful as to how I met Patrick in the first place. And that is, if you take the ocean as a metaphor, mm-hmm. If you go to the ocean, in the ocean, there's various different ecosystems that are all happening simultaneously based upon different depths.
Right.
So if you take sort of the coral depth, you've got an entire species of fish and their own sort of predators or food or environment that's adjusted to that ecosystem based upon temperature and sunlight and pressure and all of that stuff.
Sure.
If you go into open ocean and drop a couple of 100 feet, you have a very different environment with different fish and predators and behaviors and food, etc., adaptation to pressures and sunlight. And then if you go to the bottom feeders, again, a very different environment. Mm-hmm. So you've got these different ecosystems that are all operating in the same ocean, but based upon depth.
Yes.
So people understand that. See, a clownfish like Nemo has no surprise finding an anemone to live in, because it's at the same level.
Right.
But the bottom feeders are never going to meet the top feeders. It's just, as a general rule, that just doesn't happen. So what happens with us when it comes to meeting people, or we just happen to bump into somebody that just happens to be our kind of person, or meet the right person, or have the right phone call, what happens is that we get seduced into thinking that we're all at the same surface level of the earth, called sea level, for example, or at ground level. We don't get the depths that are happening, but the depths are happening, but in terms of energy.
Right.
So you calibrating at a certain level of consciousness, whether it's, I'll give you a simple answer, a victim mode versus achiever mode.
Sure.
Yeah. There are two different levels of conscious awareness. Mm-hmm. There are two different default states of operating out in life. So if you're swimming along, even though it's the surface of the earth, but you're in achiever mode, you're likely to bump into other schools of fish that are in achiever mode.
Yep.
But because we are operating spatially at one depth, we tend to miss it and call it coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not coincidence. Yeah, synchronicity is it's as predictable. Somebody meeting somebody that is there, but you're on holiday, you happen to bump into a couple that just you happen to get on great with. Well, guess what? You were swimming at the same level. Mm-hmm. It's just energetically. So there was you imagine the predominant depth of energy in Pentonville in the prison was horrific. Is the only way I can describe it. It was so much despair, so much anger, so much animosity, hate, resentment. It was overwhelming. I had never in my life been in an environment where the overwhelming energy was so powerfully negative.
Sure.
I mean, it was shocking. But I still generated and met with certain people, on my wing that didn't operate at that level. And we just happened to meet or bump into each other and have conversations, just like, because we're swimming at different energetic depths.
Right.
Patrick was one of those people. And he and I just happened to meet in the gym one time and just got talking. We're standing in a lineup. We just happened to be standing together in one of those synchronistic swimming environments. And we got talking, and I was looking for a new cellmate that week because my cellmate was being moved. Anyway, you want to be careful who you banged up with for 23 hours a day. Yeah, so you want to choose wisely, or it gets chosen for you, and it could be a roll of the dice. Mm-hmm. So Patrick and I got talking, and he was a really good lad. Anyway, I got a good sense of him. He was in there for assault with his girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And the technical term is a Section 20, and it was a Class 1 Section 20, which means he was looking at between 2 to 4 years. Now, he'd been found guilty by a jury and had been remanded awaiting sentence. Anyway, so he came in and we became cellmates.
Right.
And one of the reasons I was is because he seemed to have his act together. Mm-hmm. Now, this was a guy that seemed intelligent. He seemed pretty high level consciousness. Why is he in there for what is typically seen or stereotypically seen as a wife beating exercise? Right. It didn't fit. And I'm curious. I'm a strong student of human behavior, as you are, Dov. I want to know. I like to peel back the onion. Anyway,
but again, on the stereotypical level, here's a Nigerian guy in jail for wife beating. Okay. That stereotype of we've all got the judgments going on. Oh yeah, okay. But you saw something in him. What was the first clue that this was not who he was? For you, do you remember?
Conversation we had in the gym, actually. He was feeling down and depressed, and I sort of struck up a conversation as I would normally with people, try and sort of find out what's going on so I could help them. And he came up to me at the end of the workout and he says, "Excuse me, what was your name?" I says, "Pete." He said, "I just want to say that conversation we had, it was about an hour before, when we were queuing up to go in." He says, "I've been thinking about it my whole workout. Man, it's really helped shift some of my perspective. You're a good guy." Now, the fact that he came up and acknowledged that separates it. The fact that he had the courage to re-engage, the fact that he was coming from a place of gratitude, not a place of taking, was noticeable. And that was my first clue. And so when we got in the cell, I started digging a little deeper. Mm-hmm. And we had some huge breakthroughs that first night. We're talking hugs, crying, release. This is a guy that's in for violence. And
let's just move the camera back a moment. And now we've got this guy who's in for wife beating, and the next scene is he's hugging and crying with his cellmate in jail.
Yeah,
things that make you go.
Not a typical scenario.
Not at all.
And essentially, just to give you the short version, I know he won't mind me sharing this because I detail this in the inside track and I break it down. And again, it's not just about Patrick. It's how we see the reflections of our own patterns of behavior, mainly unconsciously, that drive us, and what the results and repercussions of that are if we're not aware.
Right.
Yeah, most people go through their entire life sleeping awake.
Yep.
Yeah. Most people go to their grave making excuses for behavior they don't realize was caused by beliefs that they adopted at a young age that still no longer serve them because they were never re-questioned.
Absolutely.
And so that was really my aim for the Inside Chat, was to break this down. If I can do it in there for me and for the others, hopefully somebody can at least see parts of themselves, or ask better questions of themselves to see what's driving them.
Yes.
And so with Patrick, I'll give you the pattern. I mean, he was born in Nigeria. His mother died during childbirth with him, so he never knew his mother. He survived, but his earliest memory is his father blaming him for killing his mother and taking away his wife and soulmate. And so, I mean, imagine the environment. He's growing up feeling guilty and resentful, guilty and unloved, and being blamed for killing a woman he didn't even know that gave him life.
Right. Wow.
And so there's no love there. There's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of alone. And
just for a moment, though, just like, I just want, before, this is easy to sort of run over, but I really want people to grasp. I think that we very often lack compassion for ourselves. We're much better off than having compassion for another. But to stop and say, can you imagine what it was like to be that little boy who's come into the world, not asked to do so, come into the world, come through this mother who gave him life but dies in the process, and then he's blamed for her death, for the person who gave him life. I mean, when you look at yourself as you listen to this story from Peter, I want you to think about, where have you lacked compassion with yourself? Because it would be natural, you talked about this guy's environment, for him to feel angry and resentful because he's always at fault. If you live your life always at fault, you're going to have to build the safety mechanisms, the coping mechanisms to just get through. How could you not go astray? And yet there were pieces in him that didn't do that. From what
correct.
You told me.
And what his coping mechanism was, he followed a path that many people follow, which was to go the achiever route to become worthy of love.
Right.
And he used education initially to do that. He thought, well, if I can be smart enough, then Dad will love me. Right. If I can get enough certificates on the wall, then people won't, blame me or reject me or what have you. It's a common pattern.
Of course.
And especially in Asia as well, where education and self-worth are tied so strongly. It's tragic.
Very sad.
Highest suicide rates in the world as well. So, if Patrick went and got a master's degree in business. He then went to medical school for 4 years, got a degree in human anatomy. I mean, there's 2 degrees off the bat, Yeah. He then was doing his PhD and essentially got a lung tumor. Now, again, there's not hardly a disease these days that science isn't linking to some emotional counterpart, and lack of love is a huge internal stress that has massive implications on the body. I mean, children die from that failure to thrive syndrome just through not being held.
Yeah.
And so, if Patrick then was trying to prove himself worthy of love through the education route. Anyway, because of that education, he made it to England. Now, when he was in England, he met a wife. He fell in love, and she became pregnant. She was pregnant with twins. Sort of insta family, and the twins unfortunately were born 3.5 months premature in a London hospital, and both of them died within an hour.
Oh my goodness.
Now, again, imagine what you're going through there in terms of the roller coaster of love.
Well,
now,
also the reflection of, that he was born and his mother died, and now the other side of that is that this woman has brought 2 children into the world who have died. I mean, wow, the emotional.
A lot of triggers.
Yeah,
a lot of triggers,
wow.
And not just that. You imagine that for the ladies listening, what that would mean for the mother. I mean, severe postnatal depression. A lot of mothers blame themselves for that as well.
Of course.
And I cover and write about that in the Inside Track. And he has absolutely no base from which to give her what she most needed in that point, which is love. Why? Because she was his source of love. He was permanently empty, trying to fill up. And the only place you can really give love from is your overflow.
Right. Fully agree.
No one will ever love you more than you love yourself. Case closed. Number one rule of relationships. And so, he didn't have the tools, the resources, or the base to be able to give anything from. So they split. And then, imagine a girl that comes along, and what's going to happen if your default mode for life is being worthy of love, and now all of a sudden it's been ripped away? Are you going to be fussy about the next person that shows you love? Or are you going to grab hold of it with both hands?
Anyone, anything.
anywhere. And and there's a lot of relationships, unfortunately, that are still running that pattern.
Actually, I would say the majority of relationships are running that pattern.
You know? And so he was with this girl. They were in a hotel one night. He got a new girl. They're in a hotel. They've been out. They've had some drinks. We've all been there. They had a bit of a domestic, a bit of a altercation. They're in a hotel lobby. She goes to storm off. He grabs her, totally being driven by not wanting to lose love.
Of course.
Yeah. And she was looking to drive off. Doesn't want her to hurt herself, because what happens then if she does hurt herself and doesn't come back? That's love gone. There's alcohol involved. Again, intelligence plummets, stress is high. He grabs hold of her. There's a tussle. They clash heads. And it looks like on the camera from behind that when they're doing this, that he's actually hitting her. But it's not. It's a clash of heads.
Right.
But because there's blood, the police are called. The hotel calls the police. The police grab him. The hotel CCTV, the Crown Prosecution Service, review that and think that they can get a conviction based upon the CCTV.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the challenge. I told you earlier, the system isn't based on fairness.
Nope.
It's based upon conviction rates. See, the Crown Prosecution Service and the people that prosecute aren't rewarded for doing the right thing. Careers aren't built on doing the right thing. Careers are built on targets, conviction rates. And here was an easy conviction rate based upon CCTV footage. Even the girl herself didn't want to show up and give evidence other than the fact that it was an accident. Didn't care. The police hid her behind a screen to make it look as if she was scared. And the whole thing just went, the jury found him guilty.
Right.
Anyway, when he uncovered the patterns that were driving that behavior, and again, there's a distinction here. Now, I'm not making an excuse for what he did.
No.
Now, let's get that off the bat. All right. Yeah. He grabbed the girl. They had they're having an argument, and they clashed heads. Whatever happened. I'm not here to pass judgment on that. What I'm here to say, I said to him, what is driving that? Right, because here's what I knew it wasn't. It wasn't some drunken asshole who was essentially trying to impose his ego dominance onto a woman, which is where a lot of these things have their genesis.
Of course.
But one thing I also know, it was a female judge. She wouldn't see that. She didn't know any of the history or the background. She probably sees 10 of these guys a week that are there slapping their girls around, and that instantly gets tarred with the same brush.
Of course.
You could almost write the script. 3 years in jail.
Right.
So, once Patrick had seen himself what was actually driving him, because he didn't even know.
Of course not.
And understand that pattern and also feel guilty about it, we helped put a letter together, or I did, that allowed him to write to the judge and explain some of the reason. Thank the judge for giving him the opportunity for the self-reflection that allowed him to discover what was driving him. And the judge said that you'd not read a letter like it in 20 years. It was honest. It was authentic. And I said to him, look, I'm going to ask for a suspended sentence. Not because I want to get you off. That's not what I'm not here to release people that should be in jail out of jail. That's not my mission. But it's to allow the judge to understand that you have grown out of this, and rather than give you a second chance, to give you the first real chance that you've had. Now you understand, providing that you also sign up for anger management, relationship counseling, self-love,
Sure.
all of that stuff to show they're willing to follow through. But ask for a strong suspended sentence so that if you ever cross the line again, now that you know what's causing it, then you deserve to get whacked. And he's hands up. He said, absolutely 100%. And he wrote the letter, and he went up for sentencing, looking at 3 years, and the judge gave him a suspended sentence.
Amazing.
And he was so grateful, so humbled. He came up to me, he was released, he came up to see me. It was a surprise visit, and actually asked me if I'd be the godfather to his son.
How beautiful is that?
That's
fantastic.
And by the way, the girl also wrote in a letter of saying that, and unbeknownst to him, his ex-wife even wrote a letter to the judge saying almost exactly the same thing of the stuff that we put in. I mean, without any connection, it was uncanny, but the truth.
Phenomenal.
So there was a lot of things like that. But again, the lesson here is not so much about what happened with Patrick, but what can we learn about ourselves looking in the mirror of what drives us, what really pulls the strings unconsciously that we're not even aware of. The first beliefs we should question are the ones we're most certain about.
Absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree with that. One of the assignments I give the clients that I work with is write down 10 things that you believe with every fiber of your being, and then ask them to look at why do you believe that.
Brilliant.
And it's like Because I believe it. Yeah, that's a crappy reason. Why do you believe it? And the truth is, as you know, is that you know this better than anybody I'm going to talk to, that most people believe what they believe because they adopted that belief from some other source. They never bothered to actually self-inquire and go, is that actually my belief? And if it is, why do I believe it? What is it that it's connected to for me? You know, it's an enormous challenge for people to actually stop and look at that, because, as you said, we're all, and includes me with my 30 odd years of doing what I do, and you with your 30 odd years of doing it. We're all driven, and this is what we don't pay attention to. We're driven, and most of what we think of as conscious choices are simply knee-jerk reactions until we stop. And by the way, just to make sure everybody understands this, I've been on my journey for literally more than 50 years. I started when I was a 7-year-old kid. I've consciously been in process since I was 19 years old, and I am not done. So if you think, it's easier for Dov, because no, I'm not done. I balls it up all the time, as I think you would say the same too, Peter, right?
Absolutely, hopefully.
Yeah, there's no end to that journey, and that's part of and people are always asking, well, when am I there? As long as you're asking, when am I there, you're actually not progressing. That was taking a step back, rather than saying this is the next evolution. We have got to go because we're almost at the end of the show, and I want to come back and I want to do part 2 of this, because I think there's so much more to get into that we really need to go into. So we're going to set up a date and come back. For those of you watching, listening, there's so much more to this. There's so much more that's important for you, looking at how you live and how you run your business and how you lead from what this experience is. Because one of the things that I just want to bring up as we close here is that many, there's an old saying, and the old saying is, you'll know your true friends when the feces hits the fan, right? That's when you know who's your true friends. And I have a saying that's a little bit different than that. It says, you'll know your true friends when the feces hits the fan and when you win the lottery. And what it means by that is that sometimes your true friends, the other side of it, is sometimes your true friends are only your true friends as long as you're struggling like they are. But when you're suddenly doing great things, or you want to do great things, they turn their back on you because you're not one of us anymore. So there's that side, which is I didn't expect that. And then there's the other side, those who will turn their back on you when the tough times come. And I know that this was a very revealing experience for you to discover who was really there, who's really true to you, true to themselves, true to the relationship. And I think that is in and of itself is a phenomenal lesson in leadership, because like Oprah said, I love this quote. She said that money and trouble are magnifying glasses. They don't, they simply magnify whoever you are. If you are an asshole and you get a ton of money, you'd just be a very wealthy asshole. If you are a kind, generous, caring, loving person, you get money, you'll be a more kind, loving, generous person. If you hit trouble, challenges like the kind you're talking about, and you're an asshole, you just become a more aggressive asshole. And if you are a kind, generous, caring, loving person, it gives you the magnifying glass, at least the opportunity to become even more of that, which clearly you stepped into. This has been a fascinating, fascinating conversation. I've got so much more I wanted to chat to you about. However, we are out of time, and I want to have people find out more about you themselves, reach out to you, get in touch with you. Tell us how people can get a hold of you, find out about you. I know, like I said, I know that you speak and you coach and you help other individuals. Where can they go to find out more about you?
If you simply go to petersage.com, you get a lot of information there. I've also published the inside track that's going to be on there. So if you want to see the journey as it went through on audio or on reading it, then I'd encourage you to do so, because it is a goldmine of self-reflection and insight that I really hope can help as many people on the outside as it did on the inside.
What's the one thing, even out of what we shared today, that you see as the most practical thing a leader can learn from what you shared?
Understand that there is no certainty. Understand that you cannot change anything that's happened, so resistance is futile. And as the Borg would say, and and know that your choices moment by moment are what define you. Complaining about your existing circumstances is the glue that keeps you tied to them. So therefore, accept what is, right, and then make a better choice.
Right. Absolutely. Listen, mate, it's been awesome having you on. Like I said, we're going to get you back. We're going to do part 2 of this because we have to. There's just no doubt about it.
Can't wait.
Yeah, I'll have you back. And I want to say, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for your openness, your vulnerability, and your willingness to share in this. And I know that you've always made a great difference in my life and in the lives of so many people. And I know that being inside would have done that for a lot of people. And being inside as a non-criminal is a whole other mind fornication. So, we got to come back and have some more, but I want to thank you again. Reach out to Peter Sage at petersage.com. You can find out more about the inside track like you said, where he's documented the entire time. And I've read through not all of it, but some of it, and it is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I want to thank Peter for being here with us, and I want to thank you, dear listener, dear viewer, for tuning in, for making us the top podcast for Fortune 500 listeners. I appreciate it to you enormously. And I want to say to you, if you want to find out more about the essential leadership skills that will rekindle and amplify the loyalty of your people and actually bring you back to purpose, then reach out to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Because you can't outsource authenticity. Till next time, this is Dov Baron, fullmontyleadership.com, saying, stay curious, my friend, stay curious about whether your theories will stand up when it hits the grind. Till next time, this is Dov Baron. I'm out.